And a very good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to a Lyceum Night coming to you from the Paul Christian Spiritualist Church down on the south coast of the UK. We've got it's quite nice. He's actually here, not miles away. He's actually here with us in the church. Stephen Mayger. Stephen, good evening.
Thanks, Laurie.
You all right?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Good. And Stephen's here to talk tonight on the 7 principles. Now, before you groan and go, oh no, not again, it's really interesting. All right, it's a totally different slant on things, very different from the way we're used to having these portrayed to us. So, yeah. And these Lyceum nights are just that. They're evenings where we can get together, talk, bring in spiritualism and look at different subjects and talk about different subjects and debate different subjects rather than just being accepting and not challenging of things. Just go, yeah, well, why is that then? Why does that work? So, Stephen, sir, over to you.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about the 7 principles, whether they're fit for purpose, whether they stand up to scrutiny in a modern era. And especially with the language, we are told it's language of the past, that it's not quite relevant for today. And there used to be a little bit at the bottom of the 7 principles, liberty of interpretation. And we all agreed that we should all have our own views on the 7 principles. And they are used as the cornerstone of our ability to operate in the world. We had to have a philosophy unique to ourselves to be seen as a religion, and it's felt that they were given to us as a means to an end, and that they aren't really the deep spiritual insightful philosophy that we should be expounding to the world, that each has their own individual take and should be allowed to express themselves as individuals. And where the SNU, for instance, has its memorandum and they have these 7 principles, it's expected of a medium to be able to give an address and include one of those principles and a meaning behind it. And again, it's seen as a means to an end so that you can deliver a message in a Sunday service. And so we have a lot of demonstrations of mediumship where the philosophy and the prayer isn't quite center stage, and there's no hymns, and people are just there to get messages. And we're also told that that puts bums on seats and the philosophy doesn't, even though people like to hear it and some people come just for the philosophy. It doesn't bring the movement any money in. But then you look at TED Talks and people will fly all over the world, buy a ticket, pay for a hotel, pay for a babysitter for something that they could have watched for free live on Facebook, but they're compelled to even go and hear the person speak in person because they're so inspired by that person. And we simply don't have that in spiritualism. And we don't have that because people have been so blinkered by the mediumship that they haven't looked at the philosophy, and it's sat stagnant for a long time. Madame Blavatsky was a founding member of the Theosophy Society and a big critic of spiritualism. Emma Hardinge Britten was also a founding member of that society, but they parted company over their views on mediumship, and Emma Hardinge Britten became the mother of spiritualism, and she focused on it, leaving theosophy to go off in its own direction. Now, spiritualism is the practice of mediumship. Theosophy is very different. It's based on Tibetan Buddhism, but they kind of emerged out the same phenomena and went their different ways. So you'll learn a lot of philosophy through the Tibetan Buddhism, through theosophy. And in the Tibetan Buddhism, there's 7 principles. In Hindu philosophy, there's 7 principles. And throughout history, there have been 7 principles. In spiritualism, we had this emergence. And then many years later, people were trying to make sense of it all. Andrew Jackson Davis gave us a sort of 10 principles of spiritual harmony through his harmonium. And it was a way of trying to compete with the 10 commandments of spiritualism compared to other religions. And there have been many iterations of the 7 principles, But we understand that they came from the spirit realms, regardless of how they got to us and through who they got to us. They came to us through mediumship, to the movement of spiritualism. And in the ancient philosophy, this is from fire through air, through water to earth. It's incorporating the four elements through the spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical nature of man. So the energy needs to be grounded from the spirit realms into the earth. And the pathway of the seven principles shows this, this grounding. So it was given through mediumship to the movement. And when we sign up to our church, and when we accept these principles as our own philosophy, we are grounding the energy. And so a church has the principles on its wall, which connects it to the earth through the foundations. And as long as the people in that group actually study them and actually mean what they say with the principles, that energy is alive in that church. And if they don't, it won't be. And so if we're not seeing spiritualism move in any particular direction, it's because it's not whole, it's not complete. We focused on the mediumship, we focused on the healing, and we let the philosophy fall to one side. So we find it very difficult to be challenged in society. Right now, there was a Sun newspaper article taking the mickey out of us, and it was an extremely accurate piece of journalism. Can't argue with a single word. And we have to accept that we are not taken seriously because our argument can be quite weak. We've got the evidence, but the people who provide the evidence don't always seem to know the philosophy. And so when we talk to Christians, Muslims, Jews, people from other faiths who grow up with a deep understanding of their religion, we look quite weak and limp because ours is so weak and limp. No one's done any hard work on it. And I found a pattern in the seven principles based on the language itself. And it's such an obvious pattern that I wonder why no one's ever noticed it. The amount of great minds that used to be in spiritualism overlooked it because arguably they were more focused on the mediumship. And the seven principles was just a means to an end for so many people. But for me, if the seven principles were something I was going to sign up to, I had to scrutinize them to the nth degree. I had to challenge every single word, look it up in the dictionary if I had to, and try to find a better argument. And I can safely say, having scrutinized them for many years, they've held up to that scrutiny and they've actually added to my understanding. Because once I started scrutinizing them, I saw a pattern. When I put that pattern against other places I'd seen that pattern, I saw correspondence between our seven principles, the spiritualism, and the Hermetic tradition of ancient Egypt and the Greco-Roman liberal arts. In fact, what I was seeing was the exact same energy expressing itself in a different era through human beings. And it appears to be the way the human being expresses itself. And it reveals itself through the seven principles. And the more I looked at them, the more it felt like Mother Nature was screaming these seven principles at us. And when we look at the pathway, like I said, that the seven principles followed, it came from spirit, through our mind, through mental mediumship, through our emotions, so that we could feel spirit and express it. And we have to put it into words. We have to ground the energy by letting it out into the world. Otherwise, it becomes stagnant. And energy has to flow a certain way. There's a thermodynamics. So when you look at the thermodynamics of the seven principles and you draw it down out in a template, it's the same template as when you put it against these other seven philosophies. And that's what I want to show this evening, because it will give us an understanding that we're not building our philosophy on nothing, that through every opportunity, as the seven principles were given to us, either through Robert Dale Owen and Emma Hardinge Britten, as they said, then to the movement of spiritualism. And one of the best sources of this is the University of Spiritualism by Harry Boddington. And in it says that solicitors were involved in the forming of the union, and they suggested separating a couple of well, one principle into two. So 6 became 7. And I see that not one person is responsible for the 7 principles. At every opportunity, people have been inspired by the spirit world to alter the language, to finalize it the way it was given. And for us to end up with this formula that can be so easily transferred over time to very, very profound philosophies, I personally see the guiding hand of spirit in the 7 principles, giving us something that can stand the test of time. And 100 and whatever years later, the language is still current. So with the fatherhood of God, it's suggesting a patriarchal philosophy and religion.
We only want the slides up.
Okay, yeah. If you bring up, I think the first one, this is the template I'm talking about. And we all recognize the Kundalini, the 2 serpents around the central column, with the chakras on one side and the musical notes on the other. The reason I do this is because when you learn one simple template, it's like a set of keys that open up other doors. So by learning this one thing, you can learn everything through this lens. That's why it seems so important to learn music, color and vibration, because it teaches you about the octave that we operate in, and that there are higher and lower octaves, and we are in that visible realm of 1 octave. And through the dissection of the 7 principles, I separated them into 3 higher principles that talk about the spirit, and 4 principles that talk about the soul's journey, mostly on earth. So we see a pattern emerge. And so if we look at the next slide, it shows you this pathway of the 7 principles, how it's come from the spirit world, fire, through mental mediumship, which is air, then to the movement of spiritualism represented by water, which is emotions. And we can see that the movement, which, it's very synonymous with water, with emotion. The way we give messages, we're talking about how that feeling, we can feel that love and feel that kinship between loved ones. And through mediumship, we bring that and ground that energy to the earth. Through the 7 principles, through actually studying them, meaning them and speaking about them, and in inspiring other people with them, we ground that energy. And all mediumship, all healing, and all philosophy follows the same pattern of energy. So as an exercise, I like to sit down and draw things, even if it's not always the best drawing. It helps me in my mind understand what I've been talking about. And I think in the SNU especially, a lot of work has gone into building up very good courses that teach mediumship, that teach the mechanics of mediumship. But through the philosophy, we can learn so much more. Through these 7 principles, through learning the ancient wisdom and uniting them together, we can open up a whole new world. So that's kind of what I'm leading to with the next slide.
Next slide, please.
So when I saw this pattern that gave me a triangle and a square, it came from the language of the 7 principles. So the fatherhood of God, like I said, is it's seen as this paternal energy, but we're pretty sure God's not just a man. It's a feminine movement. These principles were given through a lady, and anyone who's been involved in spiritualism knows it's definitely not a patriarchal religion. Even if the top job goes to a man more often than a woman, I think even those men would agree that it's a very feminine movement, and mediumship is very feminine. So why on earth did the spirit world give us this language? I think we have to do a little bit of thinking, and God doesn't speak to people who don't think. So we have to find where else the fatherhood of God is mentioned in the world. In every single religion that I've studied, the fatherhood of God is talking about light, because light is the creative power that creates life in this universe. But the universe itself is that space that allows light to create in it. Mother Nature imposes a speed limit on light. Light's limited in what's capable of doing because Mother Nature imposes laws on it. So when I look at the 7 principles, I see Mother Nature speaking them, and the feminine is not absent. She is the 7 principles. So we're compelled to look at light, and light is what we are. It's how we communicate. It's the active principle. So being the brotherhood of man, when we look at light, we know that light is either a particle or a wave. So if the individual is a particle, God is the wave, or the source behind the wave. So we all work together as one mind, even though we don't see it. So the fatherhood of God and brotherhood of man is showing that we are part of a greater whole. And we can only personify God because we're human beings. It would be pointless trying to create God into something that we can't comprehend. We have to make it comprehensible. So we look at the family, and before we used to get so offended by the language, we used to be quite comfortable with it. So really, we're talking about light, but Mother Nature is what imposes those laws on light. So the feminine is not absent in the 7 principles. We just have to think. So the third principle is the communion of spirits and the ministry of angels, which shows that there is this ability to communicate, but it also shows there's a hierarchy of being, that there are higher beings in the spirit realms that we do and can communicate with, whether they're just our loved ones, our guides or helpers, but sometimes a much higher being steps forward and makes themselves known. And I think we've all experienced that in spiritualism, so we know it's a reality. These 3 principles are talking about the spirit. The 4th principle is the first principle that talks about the human soul, continuous existence of the human soul. So this is a very individual, personal perspective. It's about you and your eternal nature. This is the key principle that regarding evidential mediumship, because evidential mediumship is what proves this principle. The 5th principle, personal responsibility, and the 6th principle of compensation, retribution hereafter for all the good and evil deeds done on earth. Apparently it was these 2 principles that were one, and under advice of solicitors, they were separated and made individual. I've also heard a radio interview with Sir Ernest Oaten, and he said the communion of spirits and the ministry of saints, or communion with saints and the ministry of angels. There's different people have said things in different ways, and so when you get to the 6th principle, you've got compensation and retribution, 2 words that seem archaic. So I decided to get my dictionary out and look up to find if there's any other words I could use in a more modern context. And I didn't really feel any words jump out at me. But I looked up the word compensation and the word retribution, and there were 2 words that came up under both searches. One was repayment and the other one was recompense. Well, recompense is just saying compensation in a different way, and repayment is more about financial things and not spiritual ethics. So that 6th principle, regardless of how archaic the language seems, it actually stands up to modern scrutiny. There's no word that supersedes it, and it says exactly what it means. And the 7th principle talks about the eternal progress open to every human soul. So the 4th one talks about the individual, but the 7th talks about the collective. So it brings us full circle. And when I sort of separated them by these 4 principles of the soul and the 3 principles of the spirit, I'd seen this pattern before in the liberal arts of ancient Greece. And much like the principles of spiritualism, these were an attempt by a later generation to look back retrospectively on the culture of the ancient Romans and Greeks and sum it up. And what they did is this was all to do with the printing press. So they were looking retrospectively, and they ordered these 7 liberal arts into the trivium and the quadrivium. The trivium is the 3-fold path of critical thinking: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Probably easier to understand as input, process, output, which is much like mediumship. We know that we take in this inspiration from the spirit world. We've got to use our logical mind to understand what we're seeing and put it into words. And then we use rhetoric to express ourselves. So that shows how mediumship works through the heavens, as it were. And then number, well, number is continuous. It shows that everything's eternal because number's eternal. Number shows the possibility of eternity, both above and below zero and above and below the decimal point. And so we can see that eternity in nature through this philosophy, and we can see that eternity through the continuous existence of the human soul. Geometry is about your relationship with the space around you. So that fits perfectly with personal responsibility. Compensation, retribution, cause and effect, it fits perfectly with music, you know, the highs and lows of life, the comedy, the tragedy. And the seventh principle, well, this comes along with astronomy and gender, which is a bit odd because it doesn't unite perfectly, but I thought it was quite appropriate that when you look at the seventh principle of ancient Egypt, it brings us back to this topic of gender, fatherhood of God. And I think in England, the English language is wonderful for a lot of technical things. There's a reason why, apart from the British Empire, there's a reason why English is so well used today, because it's very expressive. It's great for very precise things because it's an amalgamation of a lot of languages, but it doesn't carry gender with it. So it's a bit of an obscure subject to English speaking people. But in Latin language, he and she is in everything. So the chair I'm sitting in would be seen as feminine because it's passive, but the person who made the chair is seen as the active principle. So a carpenter would be la charpentière, if I said that right, and the chair is la chaise, meaning it's feminine, and the carpenter's masculine. Doesn't matter if that carpenter was a man or a woman. Doesn't matter if the chair belongs to a man or a woman. That gender is talking about equality, and it's the quality of being passive or active. And if you look in any group of people, and I think about the Chilean miners when they were first buried under the ground, the alpha male had to step forward and say, right, we're going to dig ourselves out of here. We're going to get ourselves out of this situation, and I'm going to be hard on people to get them to do it. That person probably grew up in a male-dominated society, brought up by an alpha male themselves and mimicked and became that person. But after a couple of days, that leadership wasn't useful, and a new leader had to emerge. One who had grown up in a more feminine environment, was more nurturing. So even though they were a hardened miner, a tough guy, they were able to use their feminine qualities in that situation where that leadership needed to be used. And I think if those miners were all female, they would have had the same kind of leadership needs and necessity. A woman who would be the alpha would try to dig themselves out of trouble. And then when they realized that that wasn't going to help, a more nurturing matriarchal person would step forward and fill that role, whether they're male or female, because the soul is neither male or female, but both at the same time. And so like our sixth principle, it allows for reincarnation. Reincarnation's been proven. So it's there in our principles. It's there. It can be challenged, but proven to be true through our principles and through the other sets of principles. I think it's quite empowering to know that what we have built our philosophy on, it's the same energy that built the pyramids, which is still there. It's the same. If you go to a church and you look down through the layers of strata, you'll see that church was built on a much more ancient temple, which again was built on whatever was originally there that they found so sacred. And so we are building our own temple on top of the temples that came before us. It's the same energy. It's just expressing itself in a modern era. And so if we go to the next one, it's a closer look at the 7 liberal arts of ancient Greece. I'll show this thermodynamic because in the 7 principles of spiritualism, if you try to take those principles and put them in any other order, they don't really work. They work best in the order that they're given. And the same is true for these 7 liberal arts. Like I say, grammar is the word of God. Every I dotted, every T crossed. It's perfect in the way it is. Logic is how we process information, and rhetoric is how we express it. And because in our culture we read and write top to bottom, left to right, I've gone and used this as the thermodynamics. So if you see, I've gone from grammar to logic to rhetoric. Then I've crossed this divide to the quadrivium, to number. Number is the root of everything. Geometry is number in space. Music is number in time. And astronomy is number in space and time, which is why this sums up the quadrivium. It's the sort of sciences with which we can measure our place in the world. And these higher 3 principles is how we use critical thinking to do that. I've found that there's a couple of books, and I'm just going to hold them up. I'm not going to get into them and read them, but it's the trivium and the quadrivium. And if you want to give your children or yourself a decent home education into the classical arts, don't be put off by big books. They are fantastic. And if you've got any children that need home education, even if they are going to school, give them these books. It'll be the best money you ever spent, because they'll teach you how to think. A lot of our schools are factories for factory workers. And this is the kind of education that we all deserve. You know, we leave elementary school devoid of any real knowledge of the elements, and we carry on like that. And that's why people find it so hard to think and critically analyze things like the 7 principles, because we're not taught how to do it. I was lucky enough to have the time and the enthusiasm to do it a different way. And I found all these wonderful tools at our disposal. And the 7 principles empowered me to do that. Now, the same way the Greeks retrospectively looked at, we looked at the Greeks retrospectively, they looked at the ancient Egyptians retrospectively. And there was a figure called Hermes Trismegistus. In the Egyptians called him Thoth or Tahuti, Thoth the Atlantean, and the Romans called him Mercury. It seems to be the same person, and the Druids called him Merlin. And this person was supposed to have given us the tarot, Kabbalah, and the Tree of Life, and founded the Egyptian civilization from a very high state of being, and all it did from then on was become less refined. So it started off at this very, very high state of understanding, and it's degraded ever since. These Hermetic principles are found on a piece of stone called the Emerald Tablet, which is a real artifact. Sir Isaac Newton translated it, and I would highly suggest you read that at some point in your life. It's talking about alchemy and the alchemy of the soul. And what can be gleaned from that are these 7 principles of the Hermetic tradition, which the Greeks, having developed this wonderful 7 liberal arts, they all were inspired by ancient Egypt. So if you could just pop to the next slide.
Certainly. I'm glad I have a function.
Excuse my enthusiastic drawing. If anyone's really interested, there's 33 bricks on the lower one and 9 rows on the higher one. But through the Hermetic tradition, we learn that all is mind, mentalism. Everything corresponds as above, so below. And if you look at the energy pattern of a cell to the energy pattern of an atom, to that of a planet, a moon, someone's aura, a galaxy, a solar system, it's the same energy pattern. It's a toroidal field of energy. And at the center of it is this sort of double helix of energy. And we see that in our DNA, and we see that in our philosophy here as well. From the first slide, you'll see the 2 snakes. Well, in this temple, you've got these ancient principles that have stood up to the test of time. the law of correspondence, the law of vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. And this was the Greeks' way of summarizing what they learned from the ancient Egyptian culture. So when we look back at our principles, not only do they stand up to scrutiny, we can tell that they're part of the same energy that's going to be true no matter how much time passes and no matter where you are in the universe. These 7 principles are eternal, and they are part of the structure that Mother Nature has put into place that makes what we do natural and possible. So anyone who says that mediumship is unnatural, or that anything that the human being does is unnatural, isn't looking at the bigger picture. You know, it's very easy for us to get into the mentality that we're killing the earth and that the earth is this poor little victim that we are abusing and raping. But anyone who cares to actually listen to Mother Nature, she'll tell you that she knows exactly who we are and what we're doing, that she knows exactly where we're going, and she's facilitated everything consciously and with love. So I'll listen to the news and then I'll listen to her, and she gives me a very different story. And the way I see it is our principles and our walls are screaming these principles at us, and it's the mother who's speaking. We should just pay a little bit more attention. Spiritualism has been blinkered through trying to teach mediumship because that's what people want. They want to be able to do what they see mediums do. If they saw mediums make sense of the difficult and complex, if they show great insight into what they've learned from mediumship, I think people will be equally, if not more, impressed and would happily pay for hotels, babysitters, flights, just to hear someone make sense of something to them. They don't have to get a message from the spirit world. They've got a message from their own revelation, and all you can do is give them the tools. But if no one's doing this work on the 7 principles, then no one's going to come up with anything new or see anything different. And I was kind of expecting to end up with my own interpretation, but what I ended up with was a university degree in the classical arts, just no one gave me a certificate. And I learned a hell of a lot about the culture that came to Egypt, how many tens of thousands of years ago, with such a high understanding. So it gives me confidence that whatever we're going through in spiritualism, our principles are founded and grounded on the same energy. So even though you don't have to go and do a deep intellectual dive into it yourself, I'd like you to see that there is real value in the principles. We definitely shouldn't be getting rid of them. If anything, we could do with being a little bit more dogmatic. I know that's a word people don't like, but other cultures and other religions seem to really care what their philosophy is. Whether they're right or wrong, they mean it. And I'm not seeing that on the platforms in spiritualism. So that's why people aren't inspired by the philosophy in spiritualism. They've got no one to look up to. But saying that is being quite harsh, because I can think of at least 20 mediums that have inspired me with their philosophy. You know, I mean, you could probably think of more. Elaine Bevan, Mark Stone, just so many. Richard Sue Hayes at the Temple. I've got plenty of inspiration, so I can be a little bit harsh saying that no one's doing this work, but maybe it took someone as mediocre as me to see it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
But then with the philosophy, it's a very subjective thing.
Yeah.
I've sat and listened to amazing philosophers and just sat there going, all right, I need 2 days to just get my head back together now after what was just said.
Yeah.
And other people go out going, well, what was all that about? What a load of nonsense. It's a very difficult field, but, you know, you just need us to be more accepting that if it's not for us, then it's not for us. It's really easy. Just leave it alone.
I think
why pick at it?
What I see with this is the way the human soul expresses itself. It's only a map. This is just a map, and you can have a map. And I was on a holiday, and I was looking at the map, and I was looking for the shortest route to the nearest pub. and there was a river nearby, but it was May and it was quite dry. So I was taking a real chance that I could at least hop across this river if there wasn't a bridge. So I took a chance. Even though the map said the river was there, I found a little footbridge that wasn't on the map, and the water level had lowered just enough that the footbridge was exposed. Had I gone a week before, I would have got wet. Had I gone a week later, it would have been dried up. So the map isn't the territory. So your experience is going to be individual to you. So I can give you this map and you can go and explore the same map, and you will have a very different experience than mine, but the map will still be useful because it's a well-trodden pathway. It's not up for debate or discussion because it's fundamental. It's how we are. This isn't my opinion. This is just the revelation of the truth as it is. And how we express ourselves can be in any manner, shape or form, but we do it through these 7 principles. And I just want to give an example. I was sitting there thinking, am I onto something, or am I, can I really say that that's how we operate? And this little song came into my head. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye, 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was open, the birds began to sing. Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? So I thought it was a piece of grammar, and it's talking about the sun, which is astronomy. If I look at it logically, it's rhetorical. The number 6 means something. And when you look, it's about rye bread, it's agriculture. And if you plant your rye by the 6th month, it will be ready for the harvest. So as a way of passing on this agricultural wisdom. Pie, no one eats blackbird pie. 4 and 20 is the old way of saying 24. So we're talking about time, we're talking about agriculture, and it's using music, geometry, pi, number and astronomy, logic and rhetoric. So it was a perfect example of how the human soul expresses itself and how it does through these 7 principles in every way, shape or form. And it was like my little underlining, okay, I'm not crazy. I can work on this and maybe one day try and get it across to someone without looking like a lunatic. But just, one of the things I find really important is to get a piece of paper and a pen and write down your thoughts. Read them back to yourself and make sure you're not crazy. Make sure that you can say it to someone else and they're going to get it. And then when you get feedback saying, I didn't understand that, learn to tell it in such a way that it makes sense, that it's true and that it's useful. And the 7 principles, they're true, they're good and they're useful. They should be out there in the world and we should be shouting them from the rooftops, but we have to mean it and we have to know what they mean. And that's my soapbox.
Well, that was the longest introduction ever. I've no idea even where to start. I really don't. I have taken in an awful lot of what you said. I've loved an awful lot of what you said. It's so nice to hear pussycats. It's so nice to hear positive, positive comment on our movement and the strength of our philosophy. It is really true. You compared earlier and said about the major orthodox religions, and it is so true because they're brought up within that religion.
Yeah. Well, you can get a doctorate in theology, highly respected. Bishops sit in the House of Lords.
Yeah.
You can, I think it's Church of England is Cambridge, Roman Catholic is Oxford. You go and get your theology degree at the same universities where you get your physics degree. They seem like 2 polar opposites, but really they're 2 halves of the same whole. And I think theosophy would have been the other half of spiritualism, but it went so far down the Tibetan Buddhist road, and that's where it was meant to go because that's where its source was. But through those 2 understandings, I synthesized them, and it's a shame that I had to do that because spiritualism was lacking in this deeper philosophy. this deeper understanding of ourselves and what mediumship actually means. And with both the ancient Hermetic philosophy and the seven liberal arts, I see the exact same argument. You can explain mediumship so well using those seven liberal arts. You can use just that template to teach mediumship, life, and everything in it. And I think the seven Hermetic principles are more like my cosmology. The seven liberal arts is how I understand the world and higher concepts, but the seven principles explains the soul's journey in the afterlife. And if you think the ancient Egyptians, that's all they were interested in. The soul was all powerful to them. Yeah. And that symbol that I showed, the two snakes wrapped around the two shapes, comes from the caduceus, which it's the bit you can, and when it's just in a single pole, might be a bit graphic for people who are having their dinner, but the Egyptians were great anatomists, and they used to explore the human body after post-death because they believed there was great value in it. So the afterlife means a lot of different things to them. Not only is it the soul's journey, but it's the body's journey, and they're very intricate in the way they understood things. And so when they opened up the human body, they would see the spinal column. Wrapped around that spinal column would be the arterial system and the nervous system. In the arteries, blood that is full of oxygen is being pumped around to supply oxygen would be red, and the blood moving back to the lungs would be blue because it's deoxygenated. So that's where this blue and red comes from a purely physical point of view. But in the metaphysical sense, infrared's the lowest ebb of our visible spectrum, and ultraviolet blue is at the higher. And so in the Hindu tradition, these snakes are Ida and Pingala around the Sushumna. Hello. And in our tradition, we understand the Kundalini as a meditative tool for yoga, but it's also hand in hand with our philosophy when we look at it this way. I think that's my cue to let you talk, Laurie.
No. That was it.
Yeah. But I just think we have this amazing philosophy. We don't have to carry the symbolism with, but when the Egyptians gave us this, it had a physical aspect as well as a spiritual aspect. The wings you see at the top, the cherubim, well, these are the right and left hemisphere of the brain, and the pineal gland is what I've put the SNU logo on there. And so you would see laid out on the floor the spinal column with these two sets of spirals around the nervous system and the arterial system. So if you really want to go a bit deeper in the Bible, in Genesis, the Garden of Eden had two trees that were mentioned, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Well, the tree of life is your arterial system, and it's the blood is how spirit seems to move around the body, and the nervous system, which is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. You know if something's hot or cold, rough or smooth, light or dark, through that system. So maybe if our priests interpreted it correctly to us, we'd probably listen to them a little bit more, but their hands were probably tied, and some of them probably didn't even realize that. But that's where we get this language from in the Bible. It's a way of talking about what's inside us without having to explore it ourselves. People did it for us thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt, and much of our scriptures is based on their studies of the human body, the human soul, and the human spirit, because that's all they seem to care about. People like to say that they were slave drivers and only interested in power. But if you remember the crook and the flail, this is used as, this is how they used to be slave drivers, but they were cattle herders. And you used to keep your cattle in the herd using the crook and then beat away the carnal beasts with the flail. And these are your thoughts. You're the shepherd of your thoughts, your mind. And that sounds more like the ancient Egyptians, because their culture was not about slave driving. They managed to get those buildings built. And we've seen that through archaeology that most of the people we call slaves were well looked after. Dentistry, even brain surgery was performed on the people that built those temples. That doesn't sound like slaves to me. They were well-fed artisans who built with love and care and precision. And I just feel a connection to them because that was us. You know, our civilizations, they rise and they fall. But what's left over from the Egyptian period, what's left over from the Greco-Roman period, happens to be exactly the same as what we've got in spiritualism. You know, so the more I look at the 7 principles, the more they scream at me that they're here to stay and that we should focus on them as much as we focus on our mediumship, as much as we focus on our healing. No more, no less. It's part of the whole package. You know, there's 3 pillars in the spiritualist temple: mediumship, healing, and philosophy. And if one of them's weak, the temple falls down.
Yeah, very true, very true. Because it's become, isn't it, the saying of the principle is almost like a mantra now. It's just where we repeat things. I can still remember the 12 times table from school. 12 12s are 144.
Yeah.
That doesn't make me intelligent. It doesn't make me a mathematician. It just makes that I can remember things.
Yeah.
Why do 12 12s make 144? I've got no idea.
Thing is,
but they do.
I can see why in the schooling system, the national curriculum has to standardize everything. Everyone has to be speaking from the same page. And in SNU spiritualism, I can see every decision that's made, every move that's made as being an insightful collective agreement on the circumstances they have with them at the time. And they haven't been presented with a different view. So why criticize them for not having a different view? You can't criticize. It's so easy to criticize in-house the way we do, when really we should stop criticizing each other and saying, because no offense to all you lovely tutors, but I've not seen the fruits of your labor change spiritualism in any way, shape or form. I just see more mechanics of mediumship, you know, which in my own opinion, you can't teach mediumship. Mediumship emerges. You have to set an example. And by giving your own biography, it's useful to other people. But I think in the last however many decades, all we've ever got is biographical answers to questions. People just want to give their version of events, their life story, because that's all they've got to go on. Because despite the fact that when you join someone like the SNU, you get given a book, The Philosophy of Spiritualism, you could argue that it doesn't go into a lot of great depth. But then I'm hearing people speaking on the platform and they haven't even read that book, because you can hear it in their lack of understanding of the 7 principles. And you know, people say, when you talk about the 7 principles as the philosophy of spiritualism, they tend to say, well, I don't think it's the philosophy of spiritualism. I just think it's there as a means to an end. And having done the work I have on it, I cringe and have to walk away and bite my tongue, because otherwise I have to spend an hour and a half taking them through all my slides and trying to show them, you know, looking crazy at the same time. So I think even though we can't all be expected to stand up on a platform and in 15 minutes show everything I've shown tonight. I just think that we should do our own personal work like this. And then when we do go up on the platform, learn to say it so simply that they can't help but remember what you said when you went home. That eventually we will create the kind of speakers and philosophers that people will fly halfway around the world to hear speak, and maybe even get a message from. But I think we could be filling our churches because of the philosophy itself is strong enough. And I think I've demonstrated that. And I hope that someone picks up on what I've said, improves on it, and shows me what I've missed, because I'm willing to learn. I want to be the idiot in the room. I don't want to be the genius in the room.
That's my job. No, you see, we've got reflections of the past here and reflections also of recent conversations. when we go back to the 30s. And you know what, I'm beginning to avoid quoting the pioneers now. I'm beginning to avoid assessing everything we do against the standard of that day, because I think we have got some amazing demonstrators, amazing tutors, amazing church leaders in whatever respect. And do you know what? I think it's getting a bit tiresome for people to be constantly, yeah, but Gordon Higginson did this. Oh, yeah, but so and so did that. And I think it brings in a negative energy to me.
Yeah,
you know,
I do feel that Gordon Higginson's name is mentioned a hell of a lot for someone who isn't here anymore, and his legacy is fantastic. I don't mean to be critical, but
no.
I have been sorely disappointed by my own visits to physical mediums and watching the next morning as people who I respect join in on the ludicrous reports that I read, and I was there and did not see what you saw.
Yeah.
That looked like a mask fall on the floor to me.
Again, that's the subjective
and
side.
People don't say anything because in those environments they're not searched properly. I don't care what anyone says. Why is no one prepared to die for this movement anymore? Why is everyone so scared of being hurt? Also, did you know that it's dangerous? Well, so what? You get 70 plus years on this earth. Are you really? How long are you going to wait? But I'm forgiving with that, because I remember the healing sessions on a Saturday morning at my church. We're all looking forward to it. We've got 7 beds, 7 healers all ready to serve. We all do that first healing, and at least 3 of the healers will want a cup of tea after the first one. We're only open for an hour and a half. We've been waiting all week for this thing that we see as our life purpose. And after the first healing's over, it's like, oh, I want a cup of tea in the chat now. When there's another 10 people to give healing to, and you've only got an hour and a half.
But going back to, you mentioned there the physical mediumship, I got a little bit berated by posting a comment and saying, actually, people who attend these seances are just as much to blame.
Yeah.
And that was not the popular opinion.
Well, I stopped going because I couldn't hold my peace.
Yeah.
And I'd end up offending friends of mine.
So do we have that? Do we append that need to believe that we saw that?
Yeah.
What is firing that?
The problem, I think, is it's made worse by people who do actually study the past, because we see this incredible, unmistakable mediumship. But then when we go to experience it ourselves and see the way in which intelligent, scientifically minded people are willing to overlook massive flaws in the seance, and they have the rules of seances on the walls of some of their establishments and don't follow them. I've yet to grasp in my mind what being flicked with water does to prove spiritualism. Hula hoops flying around the air, glow in the dark hands appearing out the curtain. It's just, sorry, we look foolish.
But you can extend that onto our platforms and our centres.
Yeah.
You know, who is it? I know I keep quoting this lady because there's just something about Jean Bassett. I never met her. Everything I've read of hers, everything I've seen of hers, I just think, do you know what? I really like you.
Yeah.
I really feel a resonance there. And she said, turn of the century. Makes it sound old now, doesn't it? The turn of the century. Where are these people gone that used to fill the halls? She said they haven't gone anywhere, but we stopped giving them something to listen to.
I think we moved into
so powerful.
We moved into the world of biographies.
Yeah.
People stopped writing books on spiritualism, and they could only write from their own perspective, give their own biography. And I think that we got to be forgiving, because that's how the energy went. And try as we might, the same as physical mediumship. It used to be abundant, now it's extremely rare. Trance used to be abundant and it used to be evidential. I've yet to see an evidential trance medium give the voice of a loved one in their own voice, accent, language.
that very topic
Yeah.
has been spoken about in our group online this week.
Yeah. I mean, I do it myself.
Exactly what you just said.
And I think my guides speak very well through me, but until I hear some real evidence, when my guide gave a poorer demonstration of mediumship than I'm capable of, when it's supposed to be a closer connection, I had to be honest with myself. I hope everyone's listening, and pull back from it because it wasn't evidential. And I think a lot of us, that form of mediumship seems very sacred and holy, but it is also pointless if it doesn't demonstrate evidence. We've got to see what is spiritualism and what is fit for the circle, but not the platform.
One of the things I'm seeing in up and coming mediums and in circles is this distrust in yourself. I say to my circle, if it's a brother, say it's a brother.
Yeah.
Not, oh, there's a chap here. Could be your brother. It might be your nephew. It could have been the bloke next door. You might have seen him on a bike one day. Stop covering your ass.
Guilty as charged. Confidence, isn't
it?
Yeah.
Don't cover your ass anymore with your mediumship. Say what you see. And do you know what? If the sitter says no, guess what? You still walk out alive at the end of the session.
And the next thing
the roof doesn't cave in.
And the next thing you might give might be a very quality piece of evidence. You should never let it, you just move on. You've got it wrong, move on. It's fine. Yeah. The spirit world is still with you. And these 7 principles, the philosophy gives you confidence. It gives you a different level of confidence in what you're doing because you feel that powerful support from God, no less God. Mm-hmm. Because, like I say, this is Mother Nature screaming these principles at us from the walls of our churches. We've just got to turn those blinkers around and see the philosophy, the healing, and the mediumship together as one. Otherwise, what's the point? Why are the spirit world communicating with us if it's not to point us in the direction? And so much of the message is sometimes hidden, for want of a better, I'll see a grandfather come through and then show me himself in his 20s. Why? Well, the person I'm talking to is in their 20s and going through what he went through. There's more to the message if you look deeper into it. And when you study other philosophies and study our own philosophy, it helps you look at things more deeply and you'll glean far more from your mediumship than you did before. It's the same flash of images, but your insight and your ability to dissect that and move with it and get that message correct is improved by improving every other part of your being. And our philosophy does that.
And when you investigate the philosophy, you just said a really good, to me, key phrase there about digging into it more. And this is what we teach in the evidential mediumship. Don't just say, oh, they show me a glass, they show me a white box, they show me a plant. Everything you've just been shown has got a reason. Yeah. It's not a random act.
Yeah.
They're not spirit aren't sat there with a bag of stuff. Oh, here you go.
We're dealing with a higher intelligence.
Exactly. And when we get into the philosophy side of spiritualism and the healing side of spiritualism, these are all acts of mediumship.
Yeah.
And this is what I am constantly banging on with my circles to the point of, I think if they hear it one more time, they're going to cry. Well, boo-hoo, get on with it. If you improve every facet of your mediumship and stop this assignation of medium is somebody who talks to the dead. Medium is the interface.
I think
let's be more constructive with our language.
Whenever I've read spiritualist books, Harry Edwards especially does this, the repetitive nature of what they say certain things over and over and over and over again, not because they made a mistake, just because of how important they are. And they are simple and they are effective and they are humble. And, again, with trance, there's a point where he says, and sorry if I'm paraphrasing, I think it's in his 30 years a healer, he said, he thought that he had to be in trance so people believed it.
Yeah.
And he realized that wasn't true. And then when he dropped that, his healing improved. This thing with trance, it's great, but the philosophy is not changing. We're waiting to be spoon-fed philosophy from the spirit world when it's on the walls of our church already.
Yeah.
And we're ignoring one and expecting trance to give us everything, and it's giving us nothing. And I say that with a lot of love and respect for my guides, for trance circles. I do have, I'm not saying they're disingenuous at all. I know they're not. I know most of those wonderful trance mediums are honest, and their guides are giving us some lovely, loving philosophy. But it's up to us to use our earthly experiences, our knowledge, and awareness. Use these systems that are out there that maybe weren't given to us at school but should have been done, and learn to dissect the world and our mediumship inwardly and outwardly, because I've always talked about gnosis is the sixth sense. It's revelation. You have to have incorrect knowledge and experience to know the value of the correct knowledge and experience. And when you've got correct knowledge and experience outwardly and correct knowledge and experience inwardly, you gain wisdom and revelation. And I always say, God's given us everything we need. You don't get a gift from God. You've already got it. The only thing you'll get from God is revelation. In all the scriptures throughout the world, it's the same. But that revelation's that spiritual gold that we're after. And we only get that through study, effort, and reflection. And philosophy is that reflection.
Yeah. So, lovely Margaret Challenger, and agree wholeheartedly. In a demonstration, the philosophy address to the whole congregation as opposed to individual communication. Exactly. So why aren't we making more of it? Why are we not utilizing that opportunity to really deliver? Do we not engage with the spirit world like we used to? Is just something that's coming into my brain now. As a trance medium, now I know you've worked in the state of trance. Do you go into trance going, okay, spirit world, speak through me? Or would you go through the spirit world and go, do you know what? We need to hear about this. This is really relevant in our role today, and go.
Well, I can only say that what I've done this evening has been what they've been prompting me to say. The only time I've ever sat for trance, I knew I was going to. It was part of a group, but there was a bit of a selfish aspect to it.
Yeah.
And I mean that with a lot of respect to everyone else. That's the same energy I see in a lot of other. It's this idea that it's a higher form of mediumship, so therefore you should attain it. Now, not everyone's a decent footballer, not everyone's a born golfer, not everyone's a born artist or singer or whatever. Mediumship may be something you're born with, and if you're not born with it, well, you can try, or maybe you can develop it. But when it comes to trance and physical, that's definitely something you're born with. You can't develop it. And I won't argue with anyone on that subject. You're free to your own opinion, but I smell something not quite right in spiritualism if trance is not bringing evidence.
Yeah.
And if the greatest trance mediums are not bringing through evidential mediumship of loved ones, then what's going on?
But again, I want to get back to the pull apart. Is that because we go into trance? I know, get the right words. Do we go into our trance mediumship passive, going, come on, spirit world, use me?
Well,
rather than going in there, what it should be as an equal partnership, saying to the spirit world, do you know what? At the moment, there's a lot of fear. Talk about that. I want to hear your thoughts on how we can manage our fear today.
Well, I've heard people give trance demonstrations telling everyone they should go out and get the jab or not. And I'm like, no, the spirit world won't tell you none of that. And
again, it's always going to be coloured by the mind of the medium.
However, I've heard just recently about a medium in Chichester Nothing
No,
to do with.
don't name people. Or
Oh, no,
any
I won't
areas.
name.
It doesn't matter.
Well,
All right, yeah, thank you.
This person,
Unless they're here to defend
no,
themselves.
well,
we
this
don't talk.
person never goes to any churches, and I've heard the most amazing things about them
Brilliant.
going into trance and giving such good evidence, the mannerisms, the face changing, good transfiguration. So I believe it's happening. I've seen it with certain mediums. I won't name them, but I've watched brilliant transfiguration take place in front of me. The next morning, like a dream, it wasn't as fresh in my mind. And a few weeks later, I'm not sure what I saw.
Yeah.
But on that night, I saw the most amazing transfiguration, well, physical mediumship of the highest order. But the next morning, I wasn't so sure. 6 weeks later, I'm not putting no money on it, you know? And if it's having that kind of effect on me, then is it real? Because when something has a lasting, you have so many dreams in your life, but there are some dreams you never forget. And certain demonstrations of mediumship, trance mediumship as well, I will never forget for how powerful, spiritual and wonderful they were. So I'm not saying we should stop trance, but I'd like to see the evidence. And if people are bringing that evidence outside of our churches, and it's only people who have said maybe they were exaggerating, like lots of our spiritualists exaggerate because they don't want to look like they weren't involved in the group, like they missed the energy. Everyone else saw something I didn't. I must have been mistaken. So it's out there. I'd never put a limit on what spirit is capable of doing with us. You just can't. But we've also got to be really honest.
But also, what about the spirit world's thoughts on this? Because this tracks back to when you were talking about physical mediumship, when you're talking about trance mediumship. You know, let's be honest, there's cases of people holding a seance, 50 people, 80, £100 a head, twice a week. I always say, what does the spirit world say about that? I think this is to me, spiritualism is an experience, and we should be open to that experience. From the minute we walk in the door, everything is the experience, and enjoy that experience. Don't sit there like, come on, entertain me.
I think at times like this, we need to look for leadership role models. And the one that was given to us in our age, arguably, was Jesus. We can cherry pick from the Bible and the New Testament all we want. But there's a section where he tells his disciples what he wants from them. Go out, heal the sick amongst them, cast out demons, raise the dead, mediumship, casting out demons. Well, that's helping people deal with addictions. That's just the language they used at the time. And freely it was given, so freely you shall give it. And he elaborates in another verse where he says, eat what they put in front of you. I've gone to, when I was a vegetarian, I'll be going to spiritualist churches. Would you like a sandwich afterwards? Yes. You vegetarian? Yes. Do you eat ham? Yes. I'll eat whatever you put in front of me because it's spiritual food. It's not a
fish sandwich. Anyway, Margaret Challenger, do you think that the student isn't aware, not taught, that receiving inspirational communication, philosophy, trance is a very natural process, but because the medium isn't giving a message, they shy away from any form of philosophy or trance? So, are we putting the emphasis on the evidential mediumship? Is probably a fair synopsis of that.
Yes, I mean, with trance, when the spirit world speak in trance, 9 times out of 10, there's a flow. There's no ums or ahs. They came prepared. They knew what they were going to say, and it only adds. That in itself is fairly evidential to me. So I'm not completely poo-pooing it.
I've seen one of our local trance mediums sit there for 2.5 hours, continual flow of talk, no hesitation, cough, drink of water, nothing.
Yeah, and their timing
just
is
a pure flow. And I'm like, do you know what? That is evidential in itself.
The
Because
value
you
of the
can't do
philosophy,
that.
the loving nature of it, it's all positive.
So anyway, do you want to get back to Margaret's
Yeah,
question here and stop going rambling off on your track?
I think that the student isn't aware because they're not taught, and they need that leadership. They need to see someone demonstrate it. They need someone to show them, to initiate their thought, and then they need good guidance, but not just from their church, but from themselves. You know, learn these very basic, simple input, process, output. How are you taking in the information? What are you gleaning from it? Because someone can tell you something completely unaware, but you've gained more out of what they said than they have. You know, the student is supposed to surpass the teacher, and we haven't seen that in over 50 years in spiritualism.
Yeah.
Sorry to say it like that, but it's true. There's some wonderful, wonderful teachers out there. A lot of the ministers and the tutors at the Arthur Finney College, I've seen them demonstrate, and I've met them. They're lovely. But there's also this very repetitive nature. And without putting too fine a point on it, when I did the healing courses and you do a assessment day, there's a point where you are asked to sense the guide working with the healer. And not many people who do healing sit in circle for any long period of time and can actually differentiate their guide from another. And I thought, this is one of those points where in the literature, to the letter of the law, you know, you can't get past this point unless you have passed this test, as it were. But the person testing you hasn't passed the test themselves. They're not trained as mediums to be aware at such a deep level. But it's fine, because the more healers we have, the spirit world work with them. So it's like this, I'm trying to think of the word. It's something that was introduced as an instrument to ensure only, you know, pure healers got through the system in a sense. And maybe it was a little bit harsh, and it was left over from a time when people used to see things in that way. But I thought it was interesting because, you know, if you've got through the 2-year course and you've done all the homework and everything, you're obviously serious about it and would make a good healer. You've got that compassion in you. Even if you started the course with other intentions, hoping that certificate would help boost your profile, raise your fee, the process humbles people and it brings them into alignment with the truth. And I've seen more people humbled by doing the courses than I've seen them go the other way.
Yeah, and it's the same with circles and development. You know, and bringing in an aspect all the time, and the same lines being used all the time. This is conditioning your soul. This will bring about change. This will bring about change within you and those around you. We had a lovely medium down this way. Bless her, she's gone back home. And she was married 5 times. You know, we used to joke she must like cake. But she said, I just grew out of people. And I went, I'm
on at least life number 7, if not 9.
And it does. You know, and this is part of the journey. That you will change, you will evolve, and those around you may not. So that's something you're going to have to deal with. And again, that is part of the evolution of your soul, managing your evolution.
I just think, you know, if there's a point to us incarnating onto Earth, is to have relationships, because that's all that's left. That's what mediumship's about. You don't get a tally of all the money you made. You get a tally of all the friends you made, the loved ones you made, the memories you made. And, you know, this philosophy is something that helps you understand that and integrate it. You know, it's not the be all and end all, but I think for us as a religion, whether this came directly from Robert Dale Owen or whether it came from the mind of Emma Hardinge Britten herself, she was by far the greatest mind that's ever graced spiritualism. And even if it only came from her mind was heavily connected to the spirit world and a great mind. And we were left with these principles that, like I say, you don't have to be dogmatic, but it would help if you were with these, because you could go on an adventure, a soul's journey of enlightenment. I left school with nothing, and now I can understand the trivium and quadrivium back to front. And still, every time I open a page, I learn something new.
Yeah.
It humbles you, and it shows you how little you can possibly know, but how much capacity you have for learning. And it opens up more and more the more you look at them. And if you only study these 7 principles of spiritualism on their own, because of the nature of learning one thing, you can learn everything through that lens. So they're valuable just on their own. But when they open up these other philosophies, your mind can learn so much, and you can explain things to kids. Like I say, the student is supposed to excel the master. They can only do that if you share what you know, and what you know has to be worth sharing. And I think a lot of people, when all said and done, they haven't had the 10 years that I had to spend every waking hour thinking about this stuff. They were busy doing things I didn't have to worry about.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Stephen, thank you for coming all the way from Portsmouth just to be with us tonight. We have tried to get together in the past, and the great internet god said no.
Gremlins, yeah. I'm not very capable, so your steady hand on the tech is much appreciated.
Nope, pleasure. Thank you for coming. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Those of you who wish, tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. BST, we have our live service live from here. That'll be on Facebook and YouTube. And we have 3 students from the development circles here who will be taking yet another step out into working medium status. And they are doing the reading and philosophy. And I was so happy when they said they were going to do that. I was like, yes. So good luck to them. They don't need luck. They don't need luck. They don't need luck. They're on their path, and that's great. In the meantime, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Laurie.
And thank you, Stephen. And thank you, Kat, wherever she is. Have a wonderful evening. I'm going to have to sit and watch that again and again and again.
It's worth it.
And still go, okay.
If anyone does have any questions and want to message me, I'm more than happy to message back. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
But I don't want anyone to feel that this philosophy sounds so daunting, because when you break it down, it's really simple.
I've started calling it inspirational speaking, because the philosophy word, you can see, galvanizes people into a state of rigidity.
I loved it when you said the F word.
Yeah.
Being a Stephen, I really like that.
Yeah. But when you say philosophy, you can just see it in people's eyes. They just go, or they glaze over. But, just bringing in a little bit of modern speak. Hark at me, all hip and trendy. But if you say the inspirational talk, it actually hasn't got that fear factor. And I know, because when I started off, my teacher said to me, "You've got to learn philosophy." So I'm getting all these books and going, "Well, that's rubbish. No, can't go along with that." And it took me a year to realise how you start on that journey. And I went, "Oh, why didn't somebody tell me?" And she turned around and she said, "If I told you, you wouldn't have learned it." And I went,
if I just
hold on.
Sorry, I know Laurie did say I've always got one more thing. Like
yes.
But I just basically simplified the 7 principles to one word for meaning. For me, the fatherhood of God just meant deity. The brotherhood of man meant family.
Cool.
And again, community, the individual, personal responsibilities about ownership, balance, and we all come together as one. We can simplify them that easily. It doesn't have to be daunting. You just have to do a little bit of work, think a little bit, write down your thoughts and share them, because people genuinely are inspired by other people who have had insights into themselves, because we're all looking for the answers to our great mystery of ourselves.
Yeah.
And when other people seem to have answered it in themselves, their ability to inspire other people to get through those difficult phases of their life and their development, it's priceless.
Yeah, and getting this over to aspiring mediums and working medium. You're not here to deliver messages. You're here to live a life. You're here to make the same ups as everybody else, and how you deal with them, and how you move on, and how you. But through your spiritual and your soul development, that's going to have a profound implication on how you deal with something.
Yeah.
It's going to have a profound implication on how you respond to things. And it can be really uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean,
but
it's hard work, but it's worth working at it.
Anyway, shut up. Thank you, everybody. So nice to see so many people on. Thank you. Oh, you're international, dear.
Oh,
well, look at you.
Yes.
Have a great night, everybody. And yeah, just enjoy life, because do you know what? If we can't enjoy it,